A little while ago, I asked you to send me your questions, and a few of them really surprised me. So today I am trying to answer as many of them as I can. We're going to talk about knitting, some personal things, this YouTube channel, and also a chapter of my life that you probably don't know about yet. So let's get into it. We're going to start with the personal questions first. I'm nosy and always wonder about your background, career, education, training. For some reason, I imagined you were a ballerina. I absolutely love this assumption. It is quite far from the truth, but I do love ballet. I took ballet classes both as a kid and then also currently as an adult. And yeah, it is a part of my life that is for sure a hobby, but one that I really like and that is very important to me. But my actual background is in chemistry, so I studied chemistry in university or college, and then later on also did a PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry. And during those years at the university, I worked really hard. I graduated at a very young age, and I was very committed to it. I always wanted to do my best, and it was a part of my identity for a very long time, this very scientific, analytical person. So after my PhD, I started working for a very large chemical company, and to be honest, I was absolutely miserable. I realized very quickly that I did not really enjoy this kind of environment and this kind of job, and I was working very long hours, commuting for a long time each day, also going on a lot of business trips, and I was constantly stressed out and exhausted. But I did not really think there was anything wrong with it. Basically, at that time I was just assuming that this was just how life looked like as an adult, and I just kept going until one day my body basically said, this is enough, not anymore. And at that time I was 32 weeks pregnant with my first daughter, and I ended up in the hospital with premature labor, and the doctors told me that my baby would very likely be delivered within the next couple of days. And as you might imagine, this was absolutely terrifying for me, and I was very miserable and feeling guilty about that. Yeah, I was just very, very scared and very sad. But miraculously, she was not born prematurely. She was actually delivered right around her due date, 8 weeks later, and that was such a relief, of course, and I was so happy about that. And only much, much later in my life, I was able to connect the dots and make the connection between these premature contractions that I was having very early on in the pregnancy, all the way through the 32 weeks, that this was actually connected to me being stressed by work all the time. And I still feel guilty about putting my daughter through this. I'm so happy that she is fine and everything went all right, but it was a very, very stressful and terrifying time of my life. But on a brighter note, here in Germany we have very generous maternity leave rules. So I was able to stay home with my daughter for a long period of time. I actually told the company that I worked at that I was going to stay home for 2 years with her. But then after 1.5 years, my second daughter was born, so I ended up staying home even longer. And what was so great about that is that for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I had room to breathe. I had room in my brain as well to think about things that, besides, studying or working, just things that I wanted to think about. And I was starting to ask myself a lot of uncomfortable questions, like, is that really the life that I want to live? And more importantly, is that the role model I want to be for my daughters? Is that really how I want them to see me be each day, exhausted and not fulfilled and stressed all the time and not having time for them, being gone on various business trips. And of course the answer was no. So yeah, that gave me a lot to think about. And during that time I also started to make a lot of changes in my life and the life of my family as a whole, step by step. I really got into sustainability pretty much in all areas of our life. I started to avoid plastic. I bought secondhand. I tried to consume less. I made lots of things myself instead of purchasing them. And with that also came the desire to make my own clothing. At first, I made clothes for the kids because, of course, it's way easier to make things for cute little babies, and you also don't need a lot of fabric or yarn. But then later on, I also got into making clothes for myself, and I basically have not stopped ever since. And then in 2019, I started my small business, Rosemary and Pines Fiber Arts. At first, I was planning to only sell my naturally dyed yarns. Then I also published a couple of knitting patterns and started writing blog posts on a website about natural dyeing, and then an ebook, and so on and so on. So later on in 2024, I started the YouTube channel, and this has been my main area of focus ever since. And I do have to say, I am still grateful every single day that I get up to work, that this is the kind of work I can do now, that I do not have to go back to my old job, that I do not have to feel miserable all the time, and that I can just, live life on my own terms. And that is such a wonderful feeling. But the interesting thing is that I also do not regret having studied chemistry, not at all, because that is actually when I met my husband, because we had a shared class together, and I don't think I would have met him otherwise. So despite all the hardship, despite all the long days and feeling overwhelmed, I still think it was absolutely worth it, just because that was the way I met him. Tell us about your family, and are they creative too? Well, I think creativity is relative and it can come in many different forms. So nobody in my family is making their own clothes and nobody is knitting, but I still consider them to be very creative in their own way. So my husband, for example, he really likes to cook and he comes up with his own recipes. So I think that is a form of creativity. And one of my daughters really likes to draw and paint and craft, and she's very creative in that way. And my other daughter really likes to bake and journal, and she also crochets. So I would consider all of them creative. And thinking about my original family, my mother always jokes that creativity must skip a generation because she does not consider herself a creative person at all. But I would disagree, because I think my mother is also creative in her own ways. She likes to bake, for example. I know that my grandmother really liked to sew. Unfortunately, I never met her because she was already dead when I was born, but I inherited her very old sewing machine when I was a teenager, and that is when I started making my first attempts at making my own clothing. How many languages do you speak? So my native language is German, and I speak English, of course. I am also trying to become fluent in French at the moment. I learned it in school, but I didn't really practice it a lot ever since, and now I have been studying it, I think, for 2 years maybe, almost daily, and trying to get better and better, because we spend a lot of time in France, and I would also love to move there eventually, so becoming fluent in French is very important to me. Besides that, I also learned Latin in school, and I also speak a little bit of Spanish. I learned it for 2 years when I was in university. My husband and I took like an evening class and we learned Spanish there. And in addition, I also know like a tiny bit of Portuguese, and it is one of my goals for the future to learn more Portuguese, because I absolutely love that language. I spent a month in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil as a teenager, and that was just a wonderful time, and I loved being surrounded by this beautiful and melodic language, so I would love to practice Portuguese in the future. Let's move on to the second segment, which is all about YouTube, because some of you were curious about how it all works behind the scenes. Where is your YouTube channel's name coming from? Rosemary and Pines Fiber Arts was first and foremost the name of my company, and like I mentioned, I initially wanted to only sell my naturally dyed yarns. So when I was founding the company, I was thinking about a name that would indicate this natural yarn dyeing business, and I thought, okay, what are plants that I like, that sound good together, and that you can also use as dye plants? And I chose rosemary and pine. And Fiber Arts, of course, because I wanted it to be like a name that encompasses different kinds of fiber arts, and also emphasize that I think this is really an art form. So Rosemary and Pines Fiber Arts was born. Your videos are so well put together. How does your workflow look like? This might sound a bit overwhelming to you if you have not created a YouTube video yourself yet, because it is so much more work than you would assume when you just click on a, let's say, 20-minute video. So for me, it all starts with the idea, and I think this is one of the most important things. So I come up with the idea first, and the next thing I do is create the title and the thumbnail, and the thumbnail is that little picture that you see before you click on the video. So those are the next two steps, and after that I am starting my research, and a lot of my videos are very research intensive, so this can take me quite a bit of time. After I'm done with the research, I write the script, and I script usually word for word so that I know exactly what I want to say, so that I don't miss anything, and that I also don't start to ramble or anything. So that's the next thing. Then I can film the video, and after the video is filmed, I prepare the script and make annotations for my editor, and then I send it off to the editor. So for the complete first year of my YouTube channel, I edited all of the videos myself, but that is a whole lot of work, and since I only work part-time, I only work in the mornings when my kids are at school, I just couldn't keep up with the schedule because I wanted to publish one video per week, and it was really hard for me to do everything myself. So now I have an editor, and I can send the video to him, and then he edits it and sends me the first draft, and I can then go through it and make some notes where I want him to make some changes. And once that's done, he sends the second draft, and usually by that the video is as I was expecting it to be, and then I can upload it to YouTube. But I'm still not done, because then I have to put in the description, and I really like to give very detailed notes about what's in the video. I also always have chapters so that you can skip to the segment that interests you, and I also put in all the links to the patterns that I'm talking about and so on. So and then I'm doing that. I'm also adding languages so that you can either watch or listen to the auto-dub version in your language, or that you can at least put in the subtitle in the language that you prefer. And once all of that is done, I can finally press publish. How much time does it take you to make one YouTube video? I'm sure you put so much effort into them. Yes, it does take a lot of time. And like I mentioned, if you are not into creating videos yourself, this might shock you. Because if you say, let's say, watch a 20-minute video, you usually would not assume that it takes, for me, at least 10 hours to put this video together. So I just described my whole process to you. And I would say it takes me around 10 hours a week at least to go through this whole process. And then on top of that is the editing, and the editing for my types of videos takes at least another 4 to 5 hours at a minimum, because I always like to include lots of B-roll, so lots of clips of me wearing the finished objects, or other close-ups of the yarn or whatnot. And I also have a lot of images that pop up on the screen and text, and that all takes a lot of time. But with that being said, if you are considering making videos yourself and this sounds overwhelming to you, please be aware that there is a huge spectrum on YouTube of how a video can look like. And I don't think one is better than the other, not at all. There are highly, highly produced videos that almost look like movies, and there are other videos that are not edited at all that can be just as good. They are just like very different forms of creating YouTube videos. But for me, I really like to be everything very information heavy and very valuable to you. I do not want to waste your time, so that's why I like to go through the whole effort of putting together a really great video for you each week. What are some of the lessons you have learned as you have grown your YouTube channel and online community? Is there any encouragement or tips you would share with yourself if you could speak to yourself at the beginning of this journey? And I'm curious to know about your career as a content creator. Any tips for aspiring YouTubers? Yes, for sure, I have a couple of tips. So the first one would be to just keep going. Don't get discouraged at the beginning. Everyone starts at 0 subscribers and it grows from there. So I know it can be so easy to, see the other people with thousands, tens of thousands, or millions of subscribers and feel like it's just not worth it when you're starting out. But just know that every one of those channels started exactly at 0 and they just kept going. I also think it's very important to set goals that you can influence yourself and that are not external. And what I mean by that is that I don't think it is very useful to say, I want to hit 1,000 subscribers within 3 months or something like this, because you can't really influence it. For me, the goal that I set was I want to publish at least one long form video per week for 6 months. And only after that 6 months are up, I am allowed to evaluate if this is worth it to me or if I want to do something else. So this really kept me going, and to be honest, after the 6 months, I really enjoyed the process of creating YouTube videos a lot, and I just kept going, and it's been more than 2 years now, and I never missed a single weekly upload, and it's just so much fun. And let's see, what else? I also think that you should not worry about equipment, because nowadays you can easily film with your phone if you have like a high quality camera or maybe just a medium quality camera, but you don't always need the lights and the camera and the microphone and whatever else, the teleprompter if you want to use one. You should just, set yourself like an internal goal and then try to improve maybe one little thing per video, and that way you get better and better over time. I would like to know how to do a blog post. What do you have to do in order to write and publish it? So some of you might not know this, but I also have a website where I used to put up one blog post per week. I think I started it maybe in end of 2020 or sometime in 2021, I'm not sure, but I was very consistent with it and built a huge library of posts. But when I started my YouTube channel early 2024, I could not keep up with both, so then I decided to not write any more blog posts on the website for now. It's still up and you can check everything out. There's a lot of information about natural dyeing on there if you're interested. But yeah, that was too much for me to handle. But back to the question, since I started the website before AI was really taking over, I imagine that it is very different nowadays. I think that probably if you are blogging now, you are going to heavily rely on an AI tool like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. But what I used to do was similar to my YouTube creation process. I thought about the topic for the blog post, I did the research, I came up with the title, I wrote it, I put in the pictures, and then I published it. The most difficult thing for me was to learn how to properly set up the website, because my website is on WordPress, and setting everything up in the back end was a bit challenging, and I did take a blogging course in order to learn how to do it. That course is not available anymore, so I cannot recommend it, but I'm sure if you are interested in starting to blog right now, there are definitely a lot of resources out there to help you. Now let's get into the knitting questions, and there were so many good ones. Who taught you to knit? So I learned how to knit in primary school. I think it was maybe grade 3, which means I would have been like 8 or 9 by then. And during that time, that was in the, early 90s, everyone was learning how to knit here in Germany. So we did some pottery, we learned how to knit, we learned how to crochet and to cross stitch, and that was just what we did. But I mean, of course, only the basic stitches. I remember that we had to knit some animals, and I did some kind of like, I think an earthworm was what I was going for. Seems a bit strange, but I was super proud of it. And yeah, I'm still very happy that we were able to learn these skills in school, because I know from my own daughters that they are not teaching that in primary school anymore, at least not at the primary school that my girls went to. So that was basically when I learned the foundations, and I remember knitting a couple of pieces for school during high school, but not really being that into it. I was more interested in sewing at that time. And then when I came back to knitting later on, I did rely heavily on YouTube tutorials to teach me everything that I wanted to know, because in my family or friend circle, nobody was really knitting. So there was no person in my life that I could ask for help. What's your favorite sweater you ever knitted? Well, I think that will definitely change over time, but for the past, I think 2 years, it has for sure been the sweater number 28 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. I'm going to put up a clip for you so that you can see me wear it, because I absolutely love this piece. I very, very much enjoyed the knitting process and also to wear it. So I think that's why I like it so much. It's not only because I adore the finished object. I have a lot of pieces that I really like to wear, but I also enjoyed the knitting so much. I mean, it's a very simple pattern. You do a lot of garter stitch and ribbing, so it doesn't sound too exciting, but I just found it so meditative, and I remember knitting it during the holiday season, and it was just what I needed during that more rushed time of year. Hi Annika, how are you? I'm from Bangladesh. You inspire me so much, and I learn so much from your videos. My question is, how long does it take for you to complete a knit garment? Okay, so that is difficult to answer with, one specific answer, because of course it depends on so many factors. It depends on the gauge, so how thick or thin the yarn is, and of course also the needle size. It depends on the type of garment, if it's long sleeved or short sleeved, and also on how complex the pattern is. So a simple stockinette piece, of course, knits up much quicker than a more elaborate pattern that maybe contains lace or cables or color work or whatever. So therefore the spectrum is quite wide. I do have a dress that I finished this year that took me 1.5 years to knit from start to finish. So I was having extended breaks during that time. I was not knitting on this piece for the whole 1.5 years consistently, but still it took me 1.5 years to finish. But it's also an all over lace pattern at a finer gauge, and I was also heavily modifying the pattern, so designing parts of it myself, and then of course that made it take longer as well. But I also have other pieces in my wardrobe that I knit up in, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks. The top that I'm wearing today is a perfect example. That is the Anchor Tee by Petite Knit, and I knit this up so quickly. And the sweater number 12 by My Favorite Things Knitwear is also a garment that I remember knitting up very quickly because it was so enjoyable to knit. How can you find time for knitting? I am a single working mom and can barely find time to knit. I think that is a very interesting question, and of course I don't really have much context here, so I don't know how old your kids are, how much you work, if they are already, in daycare or kindergarten or school or whatever, but let me just give you my thoughts and maybe some of that is helpful. So first of all, I want to say that there are seasons in life for everyone, and it might be a bit difficult if you see others who are talking about knitting and saying they are knitting, I don't know, 2 to 4 hours a day, and you get frustrated because you can't find like 15 minutes a day to knit. But I think, yeah, we all go through phases, especially if you have kids. They are very time consuming when they are very little, and gradually they get more and more independent, and you get more and more time back for yourself. So my kids are already 10 and 12, and they both go to school, and they don't come back home until one kid comes home at 1 o'clock and the other one at 2 o'clock. So that gives me quite an extended period of time in the morning to do whatever I want to do. And of course, they also go to bed independently in the evening. So that is another time where I can do what I want to do. But let me just say this, when my kids were smaller, I was knitting a lot less, and I was trying to find, little pockets of time where I could knit. I remember vividly, that was not one of my kids, that was actually my niece. But when my niece was a baby, I was babysitting her, and I had her like in the wrap, and she was sleeping on my belly. And I had brought my knitting because I was in the apartment of my sister, and I remember holding up the knitting like very far away from me in order not to, stab her with the needles, and then trying to get them some knitting time in. And what I also do now for my older kids, so when they get home from school, we have lunch together, and then they do their homework. And during that time, I usually always pick like a more mindless knitting project, and I sit on the kitchen table with them, so I can help them with their homework if they need any support, and then I can knit something more mindless on the side. So during the day, that's usually when I get my knitting time in. And of course, I also often knit in the afternoon. And one more thing that comes to mind for me, but maybe also helpful for you, whenever I am in a more busy season of life, I gravitate more towards more mindless projects. So I, at the moment as well, to be honest, don't feel like I'm in the place to get up a very complex chart where I have to, keep detailed track of every row. I much rather have something where I need to look at the pattern sometimes, of course, but I can basically knit all the time. So that's really what knitting is for me at the moment, a way to relax and to just keep my hands busy. So for you, it might also be, just having like a very simple project on the needles where it does not really matter if you have to put it down and pick it back up a lot during the day. Maybe just a stockinette project that you can just knit a couple of rows on or rounds, and once your kids demand your attention, you can, just easily put it down and later on pick it back up. So I think it really depends on what you want from knitting. For me, it's a way to relax and to enjoy myself and do something that I like. And you can do that, in very small increments of time during the day. I hope that helps. How many handmade pieces do you have in your wardrobe, and how long did it take you to create them? How old is the oldest piece? So I had to look that up, and the first sweater I ever made is this one, and I made it back in 2017. This is the Strokkur by Isolde Teague, and I still cannot believe how well the sweater fits me, although I had no idea what I was doing. I remember just, challenging myself to get started, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to figure it out along the way. And this one starts from the bottom up, so you basically knit in the round at first all the time, so that was easy. And then I was so confused with the yoke. I also had never done color work before, and it was quite a challenge, but I love how it came out. So I also checked how many garments I currently have in my wardrobe. I have 13 sweaters, cardigans, and long-sleeved tops, and not long, short-sleeved tops, and also 2 knit dresses. And I do have to say that those are only the pieces that are in my dresser or in my wardrobe and that I actually wear, because I have a bit of a smaller wardrobe and I actually prefer it that way. So if I create something that I do not really wear, because I don't like the fit or the color or the style or whatever, I usually either frog it or give it away. So that's why it's only 13 garment pieces, or 15 if you count the dresses on top, although I do knit a lot since quite a couple of years now. What is the most difficult garment you have ever knit? That's also a very interesting question, because when I thought about it, I realized that I do not tend to knit very complicated pieces. And I think the reason is what I just talked about, that I like my knitting to be a bit more mindless, that I can do it while my kids are around, that I can also do it in the evening when I'm maybe a bit tired, and that is just a way for me to calm down and relax. And that's why my most complicated pieces are probably not that complicated if you look at the whole spectrum of knitting patterns that is out there. But I picked 3 to talk about. And for the first, I don't think I even have a proper picture. And this is the Lady Mademoiselle Dandelion by, or Dandelion probably, because she's French, by Allons avec Anna. It is a beautiful cardigan that I made, and I do not have it anymore, unfortunately, because although I loved the color and the stitch pattern, the fit was not right. It was turned out way too small, and it was also pilling a lot. I think the yarn is discontinued now. It was some kind of silk blend. I'm blanking on the exact yarn, but I'm going to put the link to the Ravelry project page in the description box, along with everything else that I'm mentioning if you want to check it out. But yeah, that was one of the more complicated knits. I also made the Garnet Cardi by Alicia Plummer as a test knit for her. And that is another all over lace cardigan, and it's also knit in pieces and then seamed. So I remember that being a bit challenging for me as well. Unfortunately, I do not have it anymore, so I cannot show you because the fit was just way off on me. I didn't really like it. It was way too cropped, and I also didn't really like the colorway that I chose. I bought the yarn online, so later on I realized that I don't wear it, so I gave it away. And the third pattern I wanted to mention is the vintage dress I already talked about. So I'm going to put up a clip where you can see me wear it, and I'm also going to put up the pattern, because that was based on a vintage pattern from the 70s called Open Stripes, and then I heavily modified it to make it my own, and I love how it turned out. But due to the fact that I knitted at a very different gauge and I heavily modified it, it was more complicated than, just knitting from a standard pattern. When is a good age to teach a child to knit? So I only have limited experience here, but I'm going to tell you what I know. So far I have taught 2 10-year-olds and 1 12-year-old how to knit. And of course, I already mentioned that I learned how to knit myself when I was like 8 or 9 years old. So that is for sure possible as well. But what I would say, what I usually do is that I, don't go off a specific age, but I wait for the child to show some interest. And if they don't show any interest, I don't teach them. Because I don't want to force them, of course. I want it to be something that they actively want to learn. So, of course, the 10 and 12-year-olds picked it up very quickly. I just showed them the basics. We did a swatch, and then they all made a hat, and it worked out very well, actually. So I do think I have it in the top of my head that I've heard from, maybe it was in the Fruity Knitting podcast sometime years ago, somebody talking about, like a guest talking about how kids used to learn to knit at a very early age, like maybe something between the 4 or 6 year range. I don't know. I think it also depends on the country and how big of a part knitting is of the culture there. So yeah, like I said, I would go off by their interest and not by a specific age. Do you ever crochet? Yes, I do, but I am a much more experienced knitter than I am a crocheter. I actually have 5 blankets that I have crocheted. Let me show you 2 of them. Hold on. So this is my latest one, and I also spun the yarn myself. And this is another one that is still ongoing. That is a very simple granny stripe blanket. So I do really like to crochet, but yeah, I think I always feel like I have a lot to learn there. And it is actually one of my goals to crochet a garment for myself this year. I would love to make the Leerdags sweater by Linda Skuja. I'm going to put up the pattern for you because I think it's just so gorgeous. I featured her in my video about Latvia and I have wanted to crochet this sweater ever since. Let's hope that I get around to doing it this year. Knitters are always saying they love top-down constructions because they can modify when they are trying on. Honestly, I'm new to knitting sweaters and cardigans. Where exactly should the raglan line end? How to be sure? How many German short rows should I make? I read 1/3, but I don't get it. Is it 1/3 of the neck circumference or just the front part? What other modifications do you often make that are a safe choice? So those are some great questions, and I could probably make a whole video just about fit, style and construction, but let me answer your questions as precise as possible. So for the raglan shaping, the raglan line usually ends around the base of the armhole, but it definitely makes sense if you're knitting from the top down to try on the sweater as you go, because we are all shaped a little differently, and just because the designer wrote the pattern for a certain yoke depth does not automatically mean that it is going to sit the same way on your body. And for the German short rows, the rule of a third is just referring to the number of back stitches, so not the whole circumference, but only the back width. Let's see what else. You also ask about the modifications that I usually make. So I pretty much always swap out the cast on. I really like the German twisted cast on. It is not much more difficult than the long tail cast on, but I find it a bit stretchier and also a little bit prettier to look at. And for the bind off, I also often swap out that one, and some patterns also don't really specify a bind off. So if that is the case, I really like the Icelandic bind off because I think it makes for a very beautiful edge and it is also rather stretchy. I have come to like the tubular bind off more and more over the last year. I really dreaded it before because it is a sewn bind off and it takes a lot of time to do, but it also makes for a very beautiful finishing, so that's something that I enjoy as well. And let me think, I also like a folded hem as a bind off on the body, where you simply knit like a couple more inches or centimeters longer, and then you fold it inwards and bind off and attach it inwards. Other modifications that I like to make is I usually make the sleeves a little bit longer because I have very long arms and I usually need to extend that, and sometimes I also make the body a bit longer because I do not like a crop fit on me, and I feel like at the moment a lot of garments have a crop fit, so that's something I also modify quite a bit or quite often. Is it okay to take a flat piece bottom-up sweater and knit it in the round up until the armholes without any adjustments to the amount of stitches? I can't see a problem yet, maybe unless it was a fitted garment. Also, does it matter if you washed the separate flat pieces before or after seaming? So I am not a seaming expert by any means, so if anyone wants to weigh in in the comments and provide their experience, that would be great. But let me give you my take on it. And I would say yes, in most cases this can work, but it works best if it is like an easy stitch pattern or a stockinette stitch, because then it should be, not really a difference between knitting in the round and just knitting the pieces flat. But there are a couple of things to consider. The first one being that your row gauge is usually not the same as your gauge when you're knitting in the round, because a lot of people tend to make a bit looser purl stitches, and that is something to be mindful of when you switch from knitting flat to knitting in the round. You should definitely make the gauge swatch, I would say, in the round then, to know exactly what you're dealing with. Something else to keep in mind is that the side seams do add a lot of stability to a garment, and you lose that if you are knitting flat. So that's definitely also something to be aware of. And the third thing is that if you have a more complex stitch pattern, for example, let's say a lace or a cable pattern, you usually have different things you do in the right side and the wrong side. The wrong side is often like a rest row where you just purl across the stitches. But if you want to knit in the round, you then have to modify the chart or the written instructions to be applicable to knitting in the round as well, because then you, of course, you do not have a wrong side anymore. You are only knitting on the right side, and that's just something to be aware of and then modify on your own in order to make it work. And the question about blocking or washing the pieces before or after seaming, I would definitely wash and block them before seaming, because then everything is going to lay straight and it's going to be much easier for you to line up everything perfectly. So I would block each piece individually, then seam it together, and then block the finished piece again. That's what I would do. I'm wondering if you could advise me how to treat the yarn after one has unraveled a project. I want to knit something else with it. And are there any helpful hints of frogging a sweater made with merino held with mohair? Okay, I'm going to give you the textbook answer first and then tell you what I actually do. So the textbook answer is to unravel the yarn and then wind up a skein with a swift and loosely tie it in at least 3 different spots so that you have different segments of the yarn, and then it's not going to get tangled when you soak it, because then you're going to put it in like a bucket or like a washing pan that is filled with lukewarm water. Gently put it below the water surface and let it relax. And after a couple of hours, you can gently take it out. Do not like wring it very aggressively. Be very gentle with it, and press it out in a towel maybe a bit. You can also, put the yarn on the floor wrapped in the towel, and then step on it to get some of the excess water out. Then you can hang it up to dry, and once it's dried, you can wind it back up into a cake and then start knitting with it. And that way you should get most of those kinks out and the yarn is ready to go. What I usually do when I frog something is that I frog it, wind it up in a ball, and then just knit with it again. I do not go through the whole process of soaking it and drying it and winding it up again. I don't really find it makes that much of a difference for me, so I'm fine with that. But the textbook answer would be do the whole process first and then have the yarn perfectly ready to go. About the question of unraveling a sweater that was knitted with a strand of merino held together with a strand of a silk mohair, that is very tricky, and I am actually not sure if this can be done. I have never tried it myself because mohair is so difficult to unravel. If you notice a mistake, when you're knitting a project with a silk mohair yarn and only have to go back a couple of stitches, I find it to be quite challenging at times. So I'm really not sure if it's worth going through all the trouble of trying to unravel it and then it's breaking all the time. But if someone has done it before, please write a comment down below and let us know how you did that, because I can't really see how you would be able to really make that work. How do you keep track of yarn overs in lace patterns? So I actually have a very simple method I use for that, and I wanted to show you the project that I am currently working on, which has some lace panels. So it is not a very complicated lace pattern, but I still always use this method, and that is that I place stitch markers in between every lace repeat. So I would put one here, one there, and so on. So that way I only have to keep track of the one repeat I'm currently in, and it makes it much more difficult to make any mistakes. So I absolutely love this method and I use it always when knitting lace. So in case you are also confused by which row you are in, if it's a more complicated lace pattern that goes across multiple rows, I like to print out the chart and then cross out each row that I completed so I do not get lost and can't remember where I was, especially if I put the knitting project down and pick it back up later. So this was so much fun. Thank you so much for asking all these great questions, and it gave me a chance to talk a bit more about other things, beyond my usual knitting content. And if I have not answered your question, please know that there were simply too many questions for me to answer in this video, otherwise it would get way too long. I am going to save them for a future Q&A and answer them there, because I just don't want to, just rush through them within a couple of minutes now. I want them to get the time that they deserve as well. And if you have any additional questions, please just leave them as a comment under this video, and I'll see you next time. Happy knitting and take care. Bye.